Welcome back, everybody. It is time for me to finish my soap making. I have some nice pieces of fat here. Lots of fat that came off of one of the deer we harvested this year. We had a very good acorn drop. All this fat came off of one doe, and it's not even half the fat that she had on her. So you can see it's some very good thick fat. I've not been able to find anything in my resources about making soap from venison fat. I'm sure there's probably a reason for that, but as is typical, I'm going to try to find out the hard way. So here we go. I'm going to chop this up, get it ready to cook down, and see if we can get some tallow from it and or some fat from it to mix with the lye that I produced in a previous video. If you didn't see that, I encourage you to go back and check it out, and then follow along in this process and see if we can make some homemade lye soap together, just like the pioneers did. Thanks for joining me. Okay, there you have it. That's not even, that's maybe a quarter of the fat that I had. I've chopped it up really finely because the more contact with the heat and the water that I'm going to put over it to keep it from sticking, the better the fat will extract and render out. So I'm about to get my little stove set up and we'll go from there. Okay, we've gotten it started. You can see I put just enough water to cover the fat, and that's so the fat doesn't stick to the pan. That water will evaporate out as it renders the fat. But I've got my little Century camp stove going. It's been a trusty friend for over 20 years now. I've got it just on a bench here. I'm going to stay with it, but I highly encourage you, if you do this, use a very stable surface. This is probably not ideal, this 2x12, but it is stable, and I'm going to stay right here with it. You don't want anyone getting burned or children coming around. But I'm chasing daylight today to get this done, so I just set it up quick and use my propane stove rather than depending on a fire or anything a little more primitive. So stick with me. We're going to render this fat down and see how it goes. Okay, we have some good action going on now. The fat has just started boiling good. We'll continue to let this render. It'll take some time. I'm not sure exactly how long. But the idea is, even though this looks like all fat, there's always a little bit of other things in. It may not be meat necessarily, but other tissues or connective tissues, and maybe even just a slight amount of blood, because you know the blood does circulate through your fat. So we'll let all that cook out, and once it cooks and becomes more solid, we'll scoop that out, and then we'll let it cool. What should be left will be just pure rendered fat. And based off of the recipe that I've found, I think we're going to try 2-to-1 concentration, two parts rendered fat and 1 part lye, and put it into kind of a mold and go from there. So stick with me. We're almost to the point where we're going to have rendered fat. So you know, this is not really too bad. Got my fire going there, still cooking away at the fat, getting it rendered down. Got my trusty companion there keeping me safe. It's not a bad way to pass time. Doing a little bit of work, enjoying a little bit of fire and nature. Good thinking time. You know, it's important to maybe incorporate little breaks like this during your routine, just to kind of stop and evaluate and think about things. Okay, this is what you get once the water evaporates out. You can hear it's frying now. There's nothing left but fat at this point, grease, rendered fat cooking out. So I'm going to continue to fry these little pieces of fat until they get kind of like cracklings or crispy. And then we're going to scoop out what we can and I'll show you how to separate it into the pure rendered fat for the next process. Yeah, here it is starting to brown. You can see this is on its way to getting crispy. We are almost there now. Look at how much liquid fat I got out of that little bit of deer fat, or how much rendered fat I'm getting out of that little bit of deer fat. So, all right, I'm gonna scoop this out and then I'll show you how to separate it. All right, here's what's left. It's a good bit of fat. There's the little fat. Like I said, it's kind of like little fried cracklings. I won't let that go to waste though. I'll see if my barn cats will eat that. But you can see there's still a little bit of, I guess, sediment or small things that I can't get out of there without really getting aggressive. And I don't want to play much with this hot grease, with this fat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some, I'm letting this cool for a minute, not to get solid, but just cool so it's not so hot. I'm going to put some warm water in it, and I'm going to let both of them cool overnight, because as you know, fat rises to the surface and heavier objects will sink to the bottom with the water. So tomorrow morning I should have a solid little disc of pure fat on top with the water underneath and all the sediment in the base of the water. So that'll be next. Okay, so I've transferred the fat into this bowl just to kind of give a deeper well, if you will, for the fat to float to the top. I'm going to put it out here in my, I guess, we'll say prepper safe. You know, it's out in my woodshed, just a cabinet. I can kind of tie the handles shut. Don't want the critters or the cats getting to it tonight. So I've got warm water. I don't want to just, you know, put anything cold in. I don't want to solidify it too fast. I also don't want to, yeah, see there? That's exactly why I'm putting it in here tonight. I don't want it to solidify too fast. I didn't want to break the glass. So I'm just going to fill it almost up. You can already see some separation happening. And I wanted to have time for a lot of that stuff to start falling to the bottom. So I'm going to mix it up just a little. Try to keep the, no kitty. Try to keep the cats out by tying it up and keep the fat from solidifying so fast that some of that gets trapped in it. So you can see it's already starting to fall out, starting to separate. So in the morning, this should be a solid sheet of pure fat on top, water on the bottom with all the sediment. So we'll see what it looks like tomorrow. And there it is. Nice little perfect disc of pure fat. So that's the top, that's the bottom. I actually took a little butter knife and trimmed a little bit of, just a little bit of discoloration off the back, and there was maybe a little bit of trash, like a little bit of grass or something that blew into my bowl, or dirt or something before I put it in with the water. But that's how you get the perfect little disc of rendered fat out. Now I'll be able to melt this down, mix it with the lye, and pour up some soap. Here's what's left in the bowl. You can see all the remnants that I couldn't dip out or strain out fell right to the bottom and left all the fat on top. So, and it wasn't even stuck, it just popped right out. Anyway, I'm going to put this away to keep it clean in a bag and come back a little bit later today, hopefully with my lye, melt this back down, and show you how to make the soap mixture, and a couple of things I've learned about how to make the texture of the soap different as you complete the process. So, okay everybody, I am ready to make my soap. As you can see, I've got the cake of rendered fat from previously. Also, I have the lye that I made in my previous video. If you haven't watched that video, I encourage you to go back and check that out, figure out how to make some homemade lye for making your own soap or for other purposes. And I think just to spice it up a little bit, I'm going to put some lemongrass essential oils in it just to kind of give it a little bit of a smell. And from what I've studied, I think a stainless steel pot will be okay. And I'm going to reuse this bowl again that I separated the fat in just as my mold to allow it to cool and harden into the soap that that I'm going to have as the end product. And of course I have a measuring cup because, as I mentioned before, I'm going to use a 3-to-1 ratio on the lye, or fat, I guess, 3 parts fat, 1 part lye, just to make sure I don't go kind of overboard and make it too strong. And the one thing I don't have out here yet, but I'm also going to add, is some kosher salt, because I've read that adding kosher salt will help harden the soap a little bit more, and it won't be as soft. Otherwise you may come out with more of a soft, kind of like a goat milk texture soap. So stick with me. I'm going to melt this rendered fat down and then mix in the lye and take you through the process with me. Okay, I have rendered down the fat and I measured it out in my measuring cup, measured out the lye to make sure the proportions were correctly measured. I also added in a little bit of the kosher salt. I'd say I may have added too much, I don't know. This is as much an experiment for me as anything, but it was probably a teaspoon maybe. And also I've added in some of the lemongrass essential oils. Didn't really measure that, just kind of dashed it in, mixed it together until I felt like there was a proper scent, if you will, proper aroma coming from the mixture. So now I'm going to stir it until it really solidifies more and becomes more of a pudding consistency is what I've heard it described as. If it's the consistency of pudding, or it's really thick when you drag your spoon through it, it's ready to pour out into the mold. But throughout the process, I don't know if you can see there, but I have turned the heat down to the lowest setting. That's one of the reasons I'm here inside doing this. I don't think you have to be, but I felt like for my first time it would be more controlled with no breeze. It's really cold out today, and you know, I'm able to control the heat source much better than this. You don't want to scorch your fat. You don't want it to be too cool. So, you know, make sure you kind of keep an eye on the heat source and the mixture. You can't really leave it unattended to work itself. You have to stay with it consistently. So I won't make you stay with me the whole time that we're trying to get this reaction complete so that it starts thickening up, but I'll bring you back once it does so you can see what it looks like. Okay, you can see I turned the heat off because I had a little bit of separation starting, but you can see it's already starting to thicken up. It's been about 15 minutes. You can see it's still liquid, but it's starting to thicken up almost to the consistency of jelly when you're cooking it, homemade jelly. But you know, this process takes time. You don't want it to get too cool and solidify prematurely, but you also don't want it to get so hot that it starts separating and kind of foaming up and making these parts. So I'm just going to keep stirring it, and hopefully soon we will get to a point that it starts solidifying somewhat and leaves a trace behind the spoon when you pull it through. So I'll keep a monitor on the temperature, make sure it's not cooling too quickly. I may have to put a little bit of heat back on it, but you want the saponification process to kick in. So stick with me. I think we're almost there. Okay, I made a fatal error. I wouldn't say fatal error, but major error early in the process. I did a little more research because the trace just wasn't coming for me in my soap, and I realized I was pushing it too hot. It looks like most people say about 110 degrees is where the saponification process starts, which is where the fats and such and oil start emulsifying. So I let it cool down and actually broke out my immersion blender, which was what some people recommended. And look at the end result. This is what I meant by putting consistency. It is nice, smooth, creamy. You see when I push the spoon through, it leaves a little line there. And I can show you here. This is the fat texture and color when I was initially cooking it. After everything was mixed together, that's just some of the drips that came off the spoon. And this here is the ending soap product. So you can see the difference in the colors. It's more of a creamy color, and the texture is totally different. It's very smooth. So now I'm going to take this and pour it into this bowl as my mold. Let it harden overnight, and then maybe we'll be able to cut it up into bars and let it age just a little bit longer. So stick with me for just one more step. Okay, everybody, it is reveal time. It's the next morning. Here's my little cake of soap that I left overnight to cool, and feels like soap. Let's see if I can get it out. I may have to heat it up. There it came. Oh man, I knocked a little cake out of it. Look at that. That's a shame. But anyway, there's a nice little lemongrass cake of soap. I like it. I'm going to cut it up into little pieces. Oh, I'm surprised. It's actually already pretty much like soap. Everything that I'd read said to let it sit, you know, for a while and age, you know, continue to harden, but I'm pretty impressed. I mean, that's a chunk of soap already. So, there you have it. Who would have thought? Hope you enjoyed this demonstration on lye soap. And, you know, as far as my hits or misses, lessons learned, I hope it helps someone out. You know, please don't take me as the expert. I encourage you to do your own research. But this has been a fun little project. Making my own lye, making my own lye soap. And, you know, just kind of learning about the process. I will encourage you this way. Everyone that really seemed to know what they were doing on the, I guess the tutorials that I watched said, expect the first, you know, 2 or 3 times you make your own soap to be the most challenging until you kind of figure it out. And, you know, once I figured out the temperature issue with the soapification process, once I got it down to the right temperature and used the immersion blender to kind of speed the process up because it had taken so long just to kind of figure out what I did wrong. I mean, it was just like within seconds, it started emulsifying and, you know, thickening up until it hit the right consistency. So, you know, once you kind of see the process happen, it makes a lot more sense. But, you know, that's really cool. I mean, if you look at that soap, it may not be cut in the prettiest form. You can make your own forms like you would get in the store, but, and it does still feel a bit, you know, like when I touch it, I guess it does probably soften up pretty quick and come off on my skin, but almost like moisturizer. But, you know, all the tutorials I read also said this probably won't suds up the way modern soaps do and give you the big rich lather necessarily. I'm not sure how they do that in modern soap, but in a pinch, in a survival situation, in tough times, you know, you can figure out how to make your own soap. So if you can't get the bare essentials, or if you're in a situation where you don't have access, you can do this yourself. I encourage you guys to get out and learn. Try it for yourself. Practice now while you can before you really have to. So I appreciate you following along in this process. As always, I encourage you to seek the wisdom of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Stay safe, be prepared. God bless. I'm the Bearded Prepper, signing off.